Bore da a croeso cynnes I bawb. A very warm welcome to everybody to this multi-locational meeting of the Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee being held in the chamber at Penalta House and via Microsoft Teams on Tuesday the 27th of January 2026 at 10:30am. This meeting is being live streamed and a recording will be made available to view via the Council's website except for discussions involving confidential or exempt items. Therefore, the images and audio of those individuals present and or speaking will be publicly available to all via the recording on the Council's website. Members attending remotely, please leave your cameras on but mute your microphones. And for those members attending in the chamber, please use the chamber microphones when you are called on to speak. Members and officers should only activate their microphone after the chair has invited them to speak on an item. There are no planned fire drills this morning at T Penalta. If the fire alarm sounds, please make your way to the fire exit at the rear of the chamber and follow Caerphilly Council staff. If you consider yourself to have a disability, please ensure that this is known by council staff in attendance. Diolch yn fawr. Okay, in terms of apologies for absence, as we turn to the agenda, can you please record any apologies in the meeting chat or advise committee services, please? And declarations of interest, councillors and officers are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal and or prejudicial interest in respect of any item of business on this agenda in accordance with the Local Government Act 2000, the Council's Constitution and the Code of Conduct for both councillors and officers. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay. If we move on to item 3 then on the agenda today, which is the draft budget proposals for 2026-2027, and I'll now hand over to Leanne Sykes who will introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to present the draft budget proposals for 26-27 as part of the consultation process. For those of you who don't know me, I am Leanne Sykes, Director of Finance and Section 151 Officer, and I'm joined today by my Deputy Sarah Rose, and we hope to answer any questions you may have. The draft budget has been developed in accordance with the Welsh Government's Provisional Local Government Financial Settlement. For 26-27, Caerphilly CBC will receive an additional £24.641 million in funding. However, our identified cost pressures total £43.641 million, leaving a significant gap that must be addressed to deliver a balanced budget. To bridge this gap, the draft budget incorporates a package of savings and income measures totaling £12.817 million, comprising of £6.488 million in permanent savings, £0.371 million in temporary one-year savings, £0.377 million generated through a recommended 3% increase in all fees and charges, and £5.581 million of in-year transformation programme savings. In addition, a 6.25% increase in council tax is proposed, generating £6.183 million of additional funding for 26-27. For a Band D property, this represents an annual increase of £97.54 or £1.88 per week. A notable development in this year's budget is that no one-off use of reserves is required to achieve balance. This marks a significant improvement on previous years and strengthens the Council's overall financial resilience. It also means that unallocated reserves can be directed towards one-off investments and investor-save initiatives that support long-term sustainability. The draft budget also includes £2.055 million of targeted growth, supporting key service priorities. This includes £1.365 million to enhance the cleaning and greening programme and £0.690 million to support a review of fees for kinship carers. These areas of investment reflect the continuing commitment to maintaining a clean and safe environment and improving outcomes for children and young people. Members will be aware that these proposals form part of the Council's wider public consultation, which is currently underway. Feedback from this committee, along with contributions from residents, partners and other stakeholders, will inform the final budget proposals to be presented to Cabinet and Council in February. The full details of the draft budget are set out in the report provided. We welcome your comments and observations as part of this consultation process today. These will be captured in the minutes of the meetings and shared with both Cabinet and Council prior to the final budget decision. Sarah and I will do our best to answer any questions you may have today. However, for particularly service-specific queries, we may need to take these away and provide a written response to all members of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. If I could ask now if there are any comments. If you're joining us via Teams, please use the hands up button. And if you're with us in the chamber, can you please raise your hand and indicate you have a question? And I'll try and arrange them so I'm taking them in the correct order. If we can go to Judith Pritchard first, please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think it is worth noting that our financial situation would have been a lot worse if there hadn't been an agreement between Plaid Cymru and the Labour administration in Welsh Government. And it does show that cooperation and agreement actually pay to the benefit of councils and, in this case, the National Health Service. First thing I want to know, these are questions which relate directly to the effect of the budget on the voluntary sector, is about the core funding for Garvo, Citizens Advice and other organisations that we usually support. I see no mention of this in the budget, so can I assume that there are no cuts this year in their budgets? There have been in previous years, but this year I would hope, and I would like a confirmation of that there are no cuts from last year. And also, are we anticipating increasing, for instance, Garvo's funding to compensate for the fact that we are providing more work for them, especially in the grants field, because we are, for instance, bowls clubs, we are asking bowls clubs to radically change their way of working and actually finance cutting, maintaining bowling greens and bowling pavilions themselves, rather than the council do it as at the moment. So I know that Garvo has been approached about at least one bowls club, but I'm sure they're having more work because of council cuts to voluntary sector organisations. So really, to be fair, we should be increasing Garvo's share of the cake, and I don't see any sign of that, so maybe we can have a confirmation on that. That's the first question. I've got another two questions, but shall I ask the other two questions first, or can I have an answer to that?
If we take the first question, and if there's any clarification around the funding allocated currently to Garvo and Citizens Advice, if possible.
Yep, thank you very much. Yes, I can confirm there are no savings proposals affecting the voluntary sector, so funding will be maintained at the level it was for 25-26. In terms of increases, I have messaged a colleague and I'll hopefully get you an answer towards the end of this meeting, or if not, I can do it in writing just to check whether there are inflationary increases or have been included. So I'll confirm that later. Thank you.
Thank you. Second question is about Gwent Frailty. Now, this is a scheme about 25 years old. It's a pan-Gwent scheme, but there's a particular section attached to Caerphilly County Borough. And it says in the budget that staffing vacancies because they're unable to recruit to them. So there will be something like £250,000 savings in the Gwent Frailty budget. Now, that's a lot of money, and I'm concerned because this will, I think, have a knock-on effect, and it will mean that there's more work and stress and expense put on to voluntary organisations like the Alzheimer's Society, Disability Can Do, mental health charities, because people will have their service, it looks like people will have their services cut, and they will be needing advice and services from other organisations. So I'm just wondering whether this is actually a good idea. I don't think it is. And I think, okay, maybe it's difficult to recruit to positions. I'd like to know what positions it's difficult to recruit to. It's probably home care, but they do employ doctors, or they used to employ doctors. So can we have a comment on that? And then similar sort of question is the Mental Capacity Act realignment. There's a saving there. Well, I think mental health is a big issue, and same thing would apply. I mean, Mind is one of the mental health charities. I think they will probably feel a certain amount of pressure. So I, I'm concerned about this. I'm very concerned because it's a lot of money. Um, and it might have a considerable effect. It's important that we do try and get people out of hospital. We try and look after vulnerable people, of whom there are more and more because we're all getting older. And there's more dementia, for instance, is a big issue. So can we have a comment on why we're doing this?
Thank you, Judith. Is there any clarification around those 2 points today, please?
Yeah, so they are service specific, but I can say in terms of the grant frailty ones, those positions are long-term vacant posts. They've been vacant for over 2 years, so there will be no impact on the level of service that's being delivered. I can't comment on the positions, but what I can do is ask the service director to get a written response sent round. And in terms of the budget realignment, it's a budget realignment, so we are realigning the budget down to the spend that we've had in 25-26. So again, it's not a cut to service. The level of service will be maintained. It's just that the budget is over budgeted at the moment. Thank you.
Well, can I comment on that? Because I don't think it's a good policy to be looking at the underspend for the previous year, because there are increasing numbers of older people. You need to increase the budgets, and we have in some way increased some budgets for social services, or we've made a provision for an increase, because you're going to get more very vulnerable people. So the idea that because you couldn't recruit to certain positions, you don't need them, I think that's quite erroneous. Anyway, that's a comment. And I've got a third question as well, which is about the Bevan University Health Board small grant scheme. Now, is this which we're doing away with? Is this the carers scheme? Because there was a very good carers scheme whereby you could get small grants to replace, say, washing machines if your washing machine broke down, and some obviously carers have to deal with incontinence, etc. Now that was a very good scheme. Now I'm wondering if it's the same one. So could you enlighten me on that?
Thank you, Judith. Is there any more detail around that, please?
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of forecasting and looking at demand, we do that. So we look at trends. So we look at previous year's spend, we look at the spend in year, and we also look at like population forecasts and changes. So that is the professional advice from the services in terms of what level to set the budget at. So that's for the realignment of budget. In terms of the small grants, I'm just going to pass over to my colleague. 1 second.
So in terms of the small grant scheme, that hasn't been utilised, so there will actually be no impact to the service delivery on that.
Sorry, that's not the question. Is it the carers scheme? Is it the small grants for care? What I don't understand what's meant by small grant scheme. Is this the one that was intended for carers?
I don't know the specific answer to that, so we will get an answer for you and get that sent round as a written response.
Thanks very much. That's all, thanks.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We have some questions from Councillor Shacon-Dawson in the chamber now.
Thanks, Chair. I'm having trouble seeing it, but could you point out any grants that have been used to support third sector groups which might not be continued, and and any funds that might... and explain any funds that might replace these, and how will this affect groups that are in receipt of any grants?
Thank you. So in terms of if we had the notification of the grant, there have been no changes. If there are ones that we're waiting, obviously we need to wait to see from Welsh Government if there are changes, but services will be asked to manage within those grants. I don't have any specific details for you in terms of that.
So we don't know if there's any replacements?
No. Say for the ones that are continuing, they're continuing at the same level, the ones that have already been reported. In terms of changes, if we haven't been notified yet, we haven't, but in the budget report it does say that services will need to manage within their allocation.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, either in the chamber or online via Teams? No, I can't see any other hands up. One other question.
Yeah, sorry, I left my mic on as well. Sorry. It's about the fees. Have you assessed the adverse effects of raising the fees, and have you spoken to the groups to see how this will affect them, and assessed how it will affect them?
Yeah, thank you. Do you mean the freeze and charges 3% uplift?
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously we do undertake an impact assessment, but the increase is in line with the inflation. So the cost of us providing those services. So obviously we will incur pay award increases and inflation increases, and all we're doing is putting our fees and charges up in line with that. And the increase that we have proposed is below the level of inflation at the moment.
And I'm not sure if you really know this answer to this. It might be, but the decision to get the council to do the work, would that be up to the groups, or would the groups be forced into using the council, or could they go to somebody else who might save them money?
I'm really sorry, I'm not sure what you mean.
Say the council offered a service like grass cutting for a certain fee, and then there was a private provider who could provide that service for less money. Would they be allowed to use the other service, or would they be, as the ground belongs to the council, would they have to use the council?
So in terms of council services,
yes,
we would look to do it internally and use our own services,
yes,
for that. But in terms of the schools are able to choose what providers they use for their stuff, unless they have already taken out an agreement with us, in which case it follows the legal agreement that they've.
But not third sector groups, just the schools.
No, third sector the same. It depends on their level of agreement. So if they've got a legal agreement or a service level agreement, they'd have to look at the details of that.
All right. So each one depends on each individual case. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If I can turn to Stephen Talley in the chamber, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I just wanted to say on behalf of the organisations like myself and Gavo and the others that are receiving the SLAs, thank you very much for keeping it at that level. But I did want to pick up on a point that Judith had mentioned, in the sense that I'd been having a conversation with a couple of local authority members recently, and we've been talking and discussing specifically around Gavo, around the impacts of community asset transfer and some of that additional work that will be coming our way. So I think that I might be wrong on this, so please don't quote me on it, but I don't think we've had a conversation about what the SLA is going to look like next year yet. So I think it's just worth saying that depending on what we can afford and what capacity we have, then it might need to look at that SLA to see what we can actually afford if there is no additional money for it. But I'm hoping we can have those conversations now as the year progresses. But I will certainly take on board that it's probably more of a challenging time, and there are a lot of demands on us as organisations within that same funding. So I just wanted to point that out, really. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Steve. Judith, do you have another question?
Yes, I'm glad Steve mentioned community asset transfer, because this does seem to be quite a big part of the council's policy, where they are trying to offload things like allotments, for instance. And I think Steve's quite right. There will be, there probably is already, but there will be considerable demand from these organisations that are looking into community asset transfer, with the encouragement of the council, for how to go about it and whether or not it's desirable in their case. I mean, we did do a lot of work in the past about community centres, because seemed to be a threat that community centres would be they would be compulsorily required to do a community asset transfer, so they would have to stand on their own feet. That passed, actually, but I have to pay tribute to Roger Evans, who did a lot of work on community centres and in fact organised a meeting of community centre management committees. But this is a real real, well, in some ways, threat to local organisations. And Garvo would be very much involved in that. So I would, hope that as Steve says, that the service level agreement will accommodate extra funding, because Garvo's funding has been cut considerably in the last 10, 15 years. Excuse me. So maybe that's a thing that we could look into.
Thank you, Judith. Yeah, and hopefully those discussions can continue now between now and the end of March. If there aren't any other questions in the chamber or online that I can see, just to reiterate that there is still time for organisations to feedback on the draft budget, and also several opportunities within local libraries and local buildings to attend in person as well and give feedback. So we'd encourage everybody to do that on behalf of their organisations and as local residents as well. So just to note, the Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee was asked to consider and comment on the content of the report prior to final budget proposals being presented to Council on the 24th of February 2026, which has been noted. Thank you. If we can move on now then to item 4, which is the role and purpose of the Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee and a discussion on future structures. And I'll hand over to Steve Tiley, who will introduce the report. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair. So I'm going to discuss a paper that has been written in regards to the role of the Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee and looking at how we can maybe look at the structure and see whether there's improvements that we can make within that in order to support the third sector and the relationships with the local authority and partners within Caerphilly. The report is brought up and has been written based on workshops that were held in June, and there was also meetings with voluntary sector representatives back in November and December. And in short, the Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee has been very important historically. It's been in place since 1996. It's been, a really key opportunity for the voluntary sector to get involved with what's going on in the local authorities. But there are challenges now with some of the purpose of it and actually the representation and how it moves forward within this current partnership landscape. Since the creation of the Gwent Public Service Board and the more regional way of working, I think that there's been some changes in some of the structures which have been happening across the patch. And there's been a desire to have a third sector voice in different ways across each of the regions. And I would probably say that due to that, I think that the Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee just needs to have a little bit of a look at how it is kind of more focused, what we can do to try and support it moving forward, and just have looks at new ways of open discussion and collaboration and networking opportunities. I just wanted to point out as well is that Caerphilly is your only local authority within Gwent that still operates this form of Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee. Other authorities have moved towards more collaborative forums that link directly into deliveries and partnership boards. So what the paper is really proposing is that the Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee be replaced with a new collaborative forum supported by Gavo. It's looking at not so much having a formal committee, but have a clear, purposeful role in the development of the new Caerphilly Compact, which is in place, which is linked into the updated Third Sector Partnership Agreement. The forum would give an opportunity for more meaningful dialogue and collaboration. There's opportunities there for local delivery and wellbeing and representatives from the forum to be for having more integral parts in the wellbeing plans specific to Caerphilly and their objectives. It does mirror the sector's involvement across each of the other Gavo regions which we work in, and also as well with more third sector organisations now sitting on strategic partnerships within the RPB and bringing that network voice to those structures. They'll have improved networks. There'll be opportunities as well for the involvement from organisations on the ground and those volunteers to be actually more involved in what's in shaping the wellbeing work across Caerphilly. And hopefully there'll be an opportunity as well for more formal mechanisms of consultation as well, and we'll continue that with discussions around the annual budget proposals and things that go through the voluntary sector reps. The paper also outlines the purpose of and a possible appointment of an elected member for the voluntary sector champion. I know the local authority has a number of champions and they'll be able to look to make sure that there is a voluntary sector champion, potentially a relevant cabinet member or officers, and those champions will be invited where appropriate to reflect that overlap between their role and actually working with the voluntary sector and the communities. The paper will also suggest about simplifying current arrangements, specifically around grant reporting, looking at moving to more quarterly reports and annual reports into the forum, and disbanding the existing subcommittee for small grant decisions, as these can be managed under the existing financial delegations. Overall, the rationale is that the Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee structure is not really reflecting how partnerships are operating. There's an opportunity here for us to be more flexible and co-developed and working with Caerphilly in line with the rest of Gwent, and looking at how we can strengthen our engagement and have more link into the new compacts across the region. I suppose the next step is and subject to agreement, they would be looking at bringing forward a more detailed proposal of how this would work, more decisions on how we can look at structuring the voluntary sector reps and that forum as we move forward. But there is a desire to try and have this agreed so that they can be taken forward to the council AGM in May of this year. Also, as well, outside of that, just to kind of give a bit of context, is that for us then is that I think as Gavo and working with the voluntary sector reps is to look at the organisations and those networks who can maybe play a big part in those key wellbeing initiatives across Caerphilly, and look at those structures and how we can get those more involved. So I'm open to any questions. I can see there's probably going to be a wider discussion. We have had that conversation with involuntary sector reps, but more than happy to take any questions if needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. And also a big thanks to all the organisations that have fed into this report and process, and local authority officers as well. A lot of feedback and a lot of work getting to this point. So thank you, everybody. In terms of questions now and a further discussion, Judith, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, please. And a comment. I'm against this. I mean, I appreciate that Steve is in a difficult position because he's got to get on with the council. I think this is council-led and council-proposed, because basically they don't want their officers having to organise meetings. But it's the only opportunity that volunteers like myself, and I'm sitting here as a voluntary sector rep, not as a councillor, for the youth centre in Kevin Hengoed. It's the only opportunity that people like myself, who are unpaid volunteers, which is what it should be all about, serving us, get to raise issues. It seems to be anti-democratic to do away with this committee. What we've got to remember is that it is live streamed, so it's not only the people who come to the committee. And I do agree that since COVID and the hybrid system, and the fact that we got to, for some extraordinary reason, have meetings in the chamber. We used to be quite good in the room downstairs. I think that's the Rumney room. And we had some very interesting discussions and speakers. It has really deteriorated a bit, but it's the only opportunity we get to raise issues, and members of the public can watch the committee and watch the debate if they want to. And I think that's very valuable. I'm really concerned now about the fact that all the decisions will be made by, well, I don't know how to put this nicely, but bureaucrats. I mean, people who are either council officers or in paid posts, valuable as they are. So I don't like this idea that we will do away with the committee. I cannot understand the argument that we're the only ones in Gwent that have this form of governance, because I thought that was always held up to be a very good thing. And when it comes to other aspects of what happens to voluntary sector, for instance, the Welsh Church Fund grants, certainly we're not in line with the rest of Gwent at all. I mean, Roger Evans did a lot of work on this, and we are much more nitpicking and make it much more difficult for people to get the Welsh Church Fund money. And it's not council money. It's actually an endowment fund that was formed with the disestablishment of the church in, well, century before last, I think. So it's not the council money, but the hoops that people have to go through to get this Welsh Church Fund money are considerable. And one of the things that the voluntary sector subcommittee did do was try and make improvements in the grants, and we were successful to an extent, but there's still a long way to go. Now, who is going to be responsible for policy around the grants? For instance, one of the things, policy changes we made, and it was proposed by the panel. We had a grants panel, and that was done away with, but with agreement of the panel, incidentally. But I'm sorry, I'm losing my thread now. So some improvements were made, but there are still improvements that need to be made. I mean, for instance, people are not able to get Welsh Church Fund grants because allotments, for instance, have got to have a lease. Well, it's difficult to get a lease, and some allotments have been really denied the money that they desperately need. And that's not on, really. It's not acceptable. So first question is, who is going to see the policy, oversee changes of policy to the grant system, and also, please, can you address the lack of democracy? I see that the suggestion for grants is to have 3 people. We're going to have champions now. Well, that'll be champion elected members from the party, whichever party administer the council. Might be different in a couple of years' time. So who? I don't see that champions have got. Well, if it's cabinet members, have got the time to do this. So the whole thing, I think, is not an improvement on the existing, and I am against doing away with our committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Judith. Steve, did you want to come back on some of the points?
Yeah, it isn't mirrored the same across the rest of Gwent. Basically, there's been varying different models across the rest of Gwent, but the Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee has been very different in the sense that there hasn't been a number of councillors or cabinet members involved in those conversations direct. The process in which it's looking at now moving forward and currently within the RPB is to look at organisations and their networks to sit within some of these key action areas, so that they are more in line with the work that's going on in each of the regions. So there is an opportunity for those organisations then to be more embedded, and they've got those closer connections to the work on the ground in order to make the decisions and raise the points that actually those action areas are determining some of the work for. So it's being seen across the rest of the patches. It is an opportunity for the third sector to have a louder voice. So come in there. But I would also say as well, I think that you have a very good point in the sense of where we raise things like the policy change, but we're still not looking at, and we've, in the conversations that we've had, there's still the support for making sure that we can have our voluntary sector reps. And the idea would be that each of those individuals who were sitting on those action areas would report back into the voluntary sector reps. So we'd always have that link in. And there's always been a support from the local authority to say that, as we've said earlier on about, discussing the finance or budget or any policy change, then they're happy to speak to the voluntary sector reps around those anyway. So I think that there's still that link in. And it's going to be, what I will say as well as from a personal point, I think it is going to be a vital appointment, the champion, because there are champions within the local authority. We've got armed forces champions and various other champions. So I think that is going to be a vital recruitment, because that's going to really be that opportunity to be challenging when it needs to be. And I think that from a personal point of view, if we can have any say in that would be the question I would say, is that can we have any say in who that champion can be to try and be really embedded in the third sector work in order to raise it in the right way. So, but that's a conversation, if this goes through, that we'll have to have at that time.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities now to shape how this will look over the coming months, really, and hopefully an opportunity for the sector to get together with statutory partners to have a really close look at that. And think about those opportunities that Steve referred to around the wellbeing agenda and those groups that we're not currently represented on. So yeah, lots of opportunities. Judith, if you come back quite quickly, and then Councillor Shackon-Dawson had some questions, and then I'll go to Councillor Williams.
Yes, it's about whether these groups in fact will actually work, because in the previous iteration, which was the Caerphilly local partnership, which I was on as a community council rep, they set up working groups, and they were supposed to invite the public to participate. I put my name down for at least 2 and never got an invite. There was the early years, which I was very keen to go on, and then there was another one, but I didn't hear any more, even though I sent reminders. So I do hope, okay if it works, and but I do hope it will work, because it didn't work last time. Thank you.
Thanks, Judith. If I can go to Councillor Shackon-Dawson, please.
Hi, thanks, Chair. It would appear it's the decision is a fait accompli that we have to do it. Or we've got the choice. This is how we're going to do it. So when will we be able to, as reps, start discussing the process and making decisions?
So I think if it was agreed, I think the voluntary sector reps could get together and work out how this works. That would be our role, I think, now, is to try and see how this works now straight away, pretty much. I mean, if it gets agreed, I don't think there's an issue there. Because the 3 areas in which they are, just for information, is that it's focusing on employability, housing and town centres, and decarbonisation. So I think that we can start talking about some of the reps that could sit on there at the next voluntary sector reps, I would say. So I don't think that's an issue in that sense.
And have you looked at how other areas, how their systems are working, and which one works the best? So because if we have that information, we can perhaps pinch ideas from other areas, and so we run more smoothly, because we want it to work, obviously.
Of course, yeah. And the thing is that it's been varying across different regions, but by speaking to each of the regions now, in Blaenau Gwent now, we're setting up the 4 different action networks, basically, to capture the third sector voice, and then they will sit on those groups. That's in the process of coming through. I know that we've had conversations with the RPB, Monmouthshire the same, and Newport is up and running as well, where they lead. So it's been varying because of COVID. There has been changes to it, and I think that we've seen that there's needed to be changes, so we can definitely go back to those other areas and see where it's working well and what we need to be doing. And I know that we can bring some feedback to the table about that, so that's not an issue at all.
Thanks.
Thank you both. If I can turn to Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Could you tell me, please, how many members will be on this committee? Because this committee at the moment is made up of mostly councillors. And if we're going to get taken off it, cut, what's the amount going to be of members of the new committee, please? On a difference to this committee.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. I think that's one of the things that's still to be decided, really, and to be worked out. The report does refer to the possibility of a voluntary sector champion, but also other local authority champions in attendance. But there's a discussion to be had then around elected members and, who is best placed to be sat on this committee. Similarly, the voluntary sector then has to have that conversation around what voluntary sector reps sit on the new forum, really. I don't know, Steve, if you wanted to say anything more on that, really.
No, I think you've pretty much picked that up. I think that, we need to have a look at the representatives on the voluntary sector reps meeting itself. I'd like to think that whoever comes in as that voluntary sector champion would be a member of that voluntary sector reps as well, so we can be able to raise those points that we want to pick up. And obviously then you'd have those lead reps as well who are working on some of the specific action areas to be able to give updates as well and link in. So I think it's just for conversation at the moment. I think there's a different way to do it, but I think that we're at the very start of that conversation at the moment, Councillor Williams.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And if I can turn to Councillor Broughton-Petty, please.
If you're thinking of taking the council out of this new committee, where would the meetings be then? Because at the moment they're held at the council, and who would be the admin person, or who would be organising and inviting everyone?
So currently, at the moment, and Gavo is the secretariat for the voluntary sector rep, so I wouldn't be seeing that being any different. The voluntary sector reps there. And to be honest, those voluntary sector representative meetings, they meet in local community centres, community venues. So I would be saying that we would be continuing that and putting money into the sector and using sector buildings to have those conversations. I wouldn't see anything different in that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? No. So as the report suggests and as we've discussed today, there's lots of opportunities now for the sector and the local authority to be in discussion around how this is going to look. I understand hopefully later in the year there will be the opportunity to have a workshop where we look at those local delivery groups and those wellbeing priorities as well, to see where voluntary sector reps can sit around those discussions as well. So still quite a bit of work to do really to see how this is going to develop, but it is an opportunity really to improve, I think, that dialogue and the representation around the voluntary sector. So to note the recommendations within the report at 3.1 to 3.7 on pages 40 and 41 of the agenda pack. And thank you everybody. Your comments have been recorded and noted, and we will be in touch then for the developments over the coming months around those discussions. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for attending this morning's Voluntary Sector Liaison Committee. I declare the meeting closed and the webcast will be stopped. If members attending in Penalta House can I ask you to remain seated until the webcast is ended, and